Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 3, Episode 1, That Hope Is You, Part 1. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Discovery, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Discovery up to Season 3, Episode 1. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, Star Trek, as we knew from the end of Discovery Season 2, that Star Trek Discovery is reinventing itself. This is likely egged on by fan criticism that didn't like the fact that there was a prequel set before the original series that it kind of kept messing with and bumping up against canon, and they kept saying, well, why didn't we just set this after Voyager? So it seems like they're course correcting that by sending Discovery 1,000 years into the future, well past Voyager, and it does seem like this is when the show is going to take place, and so basically the show is reinventing itself. Now, I gotta admit, I'm not super excited for this season. I'm a bit pessimistic, shall we say. I'm just a bit curious. It has to win me over, because I've seen previews and they don't look terrible, but they don't inspire confidence either. It's just like, I don't know. This is going to be a hard sell because they're basically really changing the very nature of the show. I mean, they're keeping the same characters, they're keeping the same shit, but the entire situation is going to change, and they're basically rewriting Star Trek lore, because this is now becoming canon what the Federation is going to be like 1,000 years in the future, which means that that Picard and Voyager, Nemesis, Lower Decks, everything set in that time period's basically going to be a prequel to this now. So I don't know, but the main thing is that what's the plot of the show going to be like? What is this show going to be about? What is going to be the motivation, the driving force? How is it? Is it going to flow well from the previous seasons? Is it going to make sense, or is it going to feel like a totally different show? Now, so all these things are sort of floating in my mind, and so I'm a bit pessimistic. I've heard about, like, from production, statements and trailers and whatnot that basically this future, the Federation doesn't really exist, and is about Burnham sort of trying to reinvent the Federation. And I don't know. I don't know if that feels like a really great premise to me, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily terrible either. It's just, they have yet to sell me. And watching this first episode, like, my curiosity's peaked, but they've still yet to sell me on it. Now, it's just one episode, and it's apparently part 1, like it says in the title. And from, like, trailers and production leaks and whatnot, I gathered that this first episode would just be about Burnham alone on this planet with this new character they're introducing. We saw in production of releases named Book. And I wasn't very excited about that idea, because it's similar to stuff they've done before, where they'll have a season premiere which just focuses on the main character and their journey and what they're up to. And I hate that, actually. I usually find stuff like that really boring. Now, I will grant you, this wasn't quite as boring as I feared, because I thought it would just be her and Book alone on this planet in the desert, and them just wandering around, blah, blah, blah. But it did involve other characters, other people, other situations. So it wasn't quite as boring as I feared. But it was like this new character, Book. He's an interesting character. I think he will be an interesting addition to the show and give it a new flavor. But he is, let's just call it as it is, a Han Solo type. I mean, very clearly, he's the outlaw, the smuggler. They call him a courier to try to sort of, this is totally not a smuggler like Han Solo. It's a courier. He's a smuggler. He's the Han Solo type with the heart of gold. just like Han Solo. Even though he's an outlaw criminal who smuggled things, he actually has a good cause and a good heart, and we see that he was like, oh, he's a thief, but he actually stole this animal because he doesn't want it to be used as food, and he wants to try to repopulate the species or whatever. So he's a conservationist, so environmentalist. So he's a good guy at heart, even though he's a thief and does a lot of shady shit and tries to betray Burnham several times in this episode because he's was it a nerf herder? He's such a Han Solo type, but anyway, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It may not be an original thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because, as I said, it brings a interesting dynamic to the show. He's a scoundrel. Ooh, scoundrel. He likes the sound of that. But anyway, it will bring an interesting dynamic into the show. And plus, we get to see that the whole situation in the future is totally different. The Orions and Andorians are working together, something that was unheard of. And we see lots of we see Morn species in this episode, which is pretty interesting. So Wood Burnham is having this, rough on and off again, whatever, start with book. They introduce us to the concept of the burn. Which is apparently when the Federation died, like all dilithium in the galaxy, or at least this part of the galaxy, just exploded for no reason. Nobody knows why, but it basically crippled warp travel. I will tell you up front that I'm not going to get into specifics of the nature of this universe because I still don't understand it. I really didn't. They've sped by it so fast in this episode, and I couldn't understand half the stuff they were saying. So I'm actually more dependent. I'm going to watch other videos to find out exactly the very specifics, but because it seems to me like they don't really use warp that much to travel anymore because now it's seen as dangerous and unstable. And they use wormholes, and apparently Burnham's wormhole was unauthorized or whatever. Or maybe they don't use wormholes, and that's why the guy was so pissed. I don't know. As I said, I don't really get the specifics, but I do know that warp travel isn't as commonplace anymore because all the dilithium exploded and it sort of crippled the whole concept of the Federation. And nobody knows why the burn happened. It did happen, believe he said 160 years ago from this date. And so obviously the season's going to be about figuring out what the burn was, and was it caused by someone and all that. Now I do hope that it's not going to be about undoing the burn and making it so that this timeline never existed, which I get the impression it's not going to be about that because they made it clear that time travel is no longer a thing anymore. He was surprised that Burnham was a time traveler, saying that all time traveling devices or whatever have been destroyed and it's been outlawed. Doesn't mean people still don't do it though. I mean, obviously he's an outlaw, but I think they're trying to like wipe it under the rug and say it's not a thing. And he says this has happened since the Temporal War. Now I was wondering if they would touch on this because there has been some established canon about the 30th century, because that's where Crewman Daniels, who appeared in Star Trek Enterprise, was from, and there was a temporal Cold War. But the temporal Cold War turned into a hot war, as we saw in Season 4, Episode 1 of Enterprise, where it had Vost and those guys travel to this alternative history version where Nazis took over Earth because the temporal Cold War was fucking with the timeline. Although because the temporal Cold War turned into a hot war, so it was called the Temporal War, which is why he refers to it as the Temporal Wars, not the Temporal Cold Wars, because it actually became a full-on war. So I really appreciate Stargate, the reference to that, and of course they use that as an excuse to why time travel doesn't exist anymore, because after the Temple War, they completely disbanded any use of time travel, and theoretically, since the Federation destroyed in the burn, that there is no more temporal police, or the organization that Daniels belonged to no longer exists, because that was also part of the Federation, which he made very clear. So it's kind of a Mad Max type. The galaxy's kind of like a Mad Max post-apocalyptic type area where everything's destroyed. And I think that is an interesting concept. I'm willing to go with them with this concept. It looks interesting. But as I said, like, I still don't know what Burnham and Discovery's role will be in this and exactly how this is going to play out. It is interesting that she is a relic now, and that she referred to herself as a 1,000-year-old woman. But the specifics of this episode, such as, like, you know, her Burnham and Book, like, they hated, he betrayed her, got her arrested, and they gave her this truth serum, which, by the way, reminded me so much of the scene from Lost, which also they gave truth serum for someone who was a time traveler and revealed the truth, and they didn't believe him. But anyway, and it just made them high, which just made Burnham high in this episode too, which I don't know. Like, and I'll be honest, like, seeing this episode that's centered around Michael Burnham makes me realize that she's, even after 2 seasons, she's not a very well established or that dynamic of a character. I mean, I just did my review for Lower Decks, which only had 1 season. I only had 10 episodes, and yet the characters like Mariner and other characters are really well established, have a firm grip on them. There's been 26 episodes of Discovery, and I still don't really have a firm grip on Burnham, nor do I think she's that strong of a character to carry an episode by herself. Which I hate to say stuff like that, because that's, you know, I don't want to sound like a hater. But you know, it just really struck me when watching this episode that I just didn't really identify with her. I didn't really know her very well, how she would react. She just seems very melodramatic about everything, really, when she was like screaming over bullshit or whatever. But I don't know. I almost like the Book character better. I almost got more out of him from 1 episode than I did Burnham in 26 episodes, but whatever. I'm willing to go with it. Maybe they'll develop her more, make her make more sense in this setting. I was a bit frustrated. I was still frustrated, though, even though I knew what would happen, that the Discovery wasn't in this episode, and it was all about Burnham, and she was like, oh, where's Discovery? Where's Discovery? Now, we've seen from the trailers that she has super long hair when she meets up with Discovery, so you can pretty much guess that it's going to be several years before she meets up with Discovery, and they make it clear in this episode that Discovery is going to come in at a different time. Ooh, who knows when? So it's going to be several years, which is going to be interesting because that means that Burnham would have acclimated to this time period in this setting, and so she'll be more of a guide for Discovery. So I can't begrudge them that device, because that actually could be quite interesting. But we'll just have to see where they go with this, I guess. So I'm willing, like, my curiosity is piqued, and I'm willing to go with this, and I hope that they do something really interesting with it. But this first episode didn't wow me, especially all the fight scenes, which were very kinetic and a bit hyperactive and reminded me too much of the Abrams films, where it was just a bit too much, overloading the senses with all the, you know, phaser fights or whatever, and people just vanishing in front of you. It's like, ooh, look at all this action, isn't this cool? I mean, it's not bad. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it sucked. I'm just saying it doesn't get me pumped. So we'll see. We'll see where they're going with this, and I'm going to keep watching. I'm going to keep reviewing, and hopefully, I mean, there's an interesting setup here where there's a post-apocalyptic Federation there still. We saw that one dude with the bird clock who's still holding on to the Federation, that's an interesting concept, and so there's like still pieces of it around, and maybe she's going to try to put together. Maybe we'll learn more and more, and they're going to uncover the mystery of the burn. There always has to be a mystery in Discovery, doesn't it? And season 3 is going to be the mystery of the burn, which, as I said, I hope doesn't lead to them trying to undo it. But I don't think the show's going that direction. I think Discovery and Burnham are here to stay in this time period. So that's going to be really interesting. Anyway, that's going to be it for my review of the season 3 premiere of Star Trek Discovery. So I guess I'll give my rating between 1 and 10. I'm going to, out of 10, I'm going to give this 7. Very good. It was all right. It was interesting. Yeah, the characters were fine. I liked the character of Book. Their sort of interaction was entertaining. So, as I said, it didn't wow me, but it didn't suck. So, yeah, it was fine. Anyway, that's it for my review of Discovery Season 3 premiere. As I said, I shall be back every week to review Discovery, and I also cover many other shows on my channel, many more Star Trek shows, and other shows like The Expanse, BoJack Horseman, Breaking Bad, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.